Alrighty, well, here's another story. This is a story about my dad, the one I promised to tell earlier. In the earlier video, I told a story about a fellow that my dad knew that played a dirty trick on some of his friends at a drinking party by taking a poop into the fried potatoes they were making for a meal they were going to have at this party. Anyway, this same fella was mixed up in the next story I'm about to tell you, too. And this goes back now to the early 1950s when my dad was a teenager. I'll lay the background out first. In my hometown, there was a river that run through the town, and there was an area downtown that's actually still there, and it was referred to as the Basin. And this river runs through the town, right through the center of it, and the town's kind of divided up into the east and center and west wards by this river, because the river has an offshoot that kind of goes off it and then loops around and comes back to it. So the center ward is in that area between the two. It's like an island, really. And then you have the east ward and the west ward. Anyway, back in the 50s, in the wintertime, they used to do a lot of ice skating on the river back in the 40s and 50s and so on. And they had the town put a shack down by the river, down by the basin. And this mosquitoes are thick right now out here. And it was just basically a shack with benches in it, and hooks to hang things up. And they put a little stove in there so you could go in there and get warm. And so when you were skating, you could go down there and you could change out of your boots and into your skates, and you could go in there and warm up if you got chilled or whatever. That's what it was there for. And they used to hang out in there and stuff. A lot of the young people used to hang out in there. Anyway, my dad was one of those that would go down there and hang out, and there were a bunch of young guys that would go down there and hang out. Now, this is the story I was told, and I'll tell you how I came about hearing this story. It wasn't my dad that told me this. My dad never really talked about good things that he did, but this was a good thing that my dad did anyway, and I never heard it from him, though. Basically, mosquitoes. Basically, there was a man who came into my building when I lived above the Royal Bank, and he was there to visit his sister, who was a resident of the same building. And I happened to get to talking to him in the corridor or whatever, downstairs by the mailboxes. And, we introduced ourselves to each other. I knew his sister quite well. I'd been into her apartment a few times. I had done some repairs on the plumbing in there and whatnot because our landlord had refused to do it. So she got me to come in and fix up where her kitchen sink was leaking and stuff like that. I fixed that. And stuff. So I knew his sister anyway. And anyway, we introduced ourselves to each other. And when I said my name, Tom Fournier, well, my name is the same. That's my dad's name, too. My dad's name was Tom Fournier. He's been gone now since 1988. He died at 51 years of age in 1988. But when I said Tom Fournier, my dad was already gone by the time this encounter happened between myself and this other guy in the hallway. Now, this guy was an older guy. He would have been my dad's age. And he said, "Oh, was your father, Tom, was your father Tom Fournier?" He said, "Mary and Shirley Fournier's son." My grandpa's name was Shirley. his real name was Arthur. His middle name was Shirley, but everybody called him by his middle name. His name was Arthur Shirley Fournier, but everybody called him Shirley from the time he was a little kid. And he said, is he Shirley and Mary Fournier's son? And I said, well, yes. I said, those are my grandparents, Mary and Shirley Fournier. And he said, I knew your dad. And he said, I'll tell you something about your dad. He said, your dad was an awful bully. He said, your dad used to give me a wicked hard time. And I felt terrible about that. It made me feel bad. And I think he could tell because I kind of looked down and I didn't know what to say to him. And he said, but your dad could be a pretty good guy too. And he said, I'm going to tell you a story about your dad because your dad, yes, he said your dad could be a real bully at times. But he said your dad had another side to him too. And I'm going to tell you this story. And he said, I'd never heard this story anyway, but this man told me the story. And he said about back in the early 50s with the skate shack down by the basin there, and it was kind of a hangout, and a lot of the young lads hung around in there, including my dad, and who was a teenager at the time. He said there was a real pretty girl in town. He told me the girl's name. I'm not going to tell you the girl's name. It doesn't matter. And other than my dad, I'm not going to tell you the names of any of the men. Well, now men, a lot of them are passed on, of course, because they'll be quite old now. But, the boys, later on men, who were mixed up in this thing. But apparently this was a real pretty girl. And all the guys were after her. She was just really kind of a stunner. Really, really pretty. Really nice looking girl. And also a teenager, like they were. And you know what teenage hormones are like. So unlike that, especially teenage boys, they're right at it there, just wanting to get right into action, if you know what I mean. Desperate, really. And they were all kind of looking at her with their tongues hanging out and wanting to date her, and wanting to do more than date her too, really, Anyway, one day, she used to go down there and skate quite often. She'd go in there and change into her skates and go skating up and down in the Tay Basin. Anyway, my dad was down there one time, and the other guys were down there that would hang out there. And one of them was the fella I talked about that had taken the dump in the frying pan into the potatoes in the previous video. This guy and the others there, they said to my dad, we're planning, and I can't say the word, I don't think, on YouTube, but basically we're planning to impose ourselves in an intimate way on this girl. We're going to gang up on her, and we're going to take turns with her. When she comes down here to the skate shack, we're going to corner her in here, and we're going to do what we want to do. And they said, would you like to get in on it? Well, my dad, he indicated that he would. Now, he didn't do that because he actually wanted to get in on it. He did it because he wanted to be kept in the loop. He wanted to know the plan. Anyway, he found out the plan. She'd go down there usually on a Saturday and skate. And so they knew the plan. My dad then found out that they were planning to gang up on her that Saturday and to do what they were going to do to her. And as far as they knew, he was in on it, because he didn't tell them otherwise. He acted like he was in on it. But what he did is, see, my dad had a car. He had a 1939 Chev with a rumble seat, a two-door car with just a front seat and then a rumble seat, the old thing in the trunk where when you opened it up there, you'd sit in there facing behind the car, basically, looking at the road behind you, basically. That's what he had, a rumble seat in the car for a back seat. Anyway, he had this 39 Chevy car. Well, he invited this girl to go out on that Saturday with him in the car. Of course, never told her what these guys were planning to do to her. I mean, that'd be kind of an awkward conversation to have. But he invited her to go out with him anyway, and she agreed. And he took her out in the car, and he drove her all over Hell's Half Acre, took her to see all sorts of things, I guess, and took her to, to eat, and just showed her a really good time. And so, of course, those guys were all sitting down in the skate shack, waiting for the prey to show up so they could attack it. And my dad had diverted her attention elsewhere, basically, and foiled their plans. Well, of course, my dad was the only one absent. The rest of them were all there and accounted for that were in on this conspiracy to impose themselves, gang up on this girl and impose themselves on her. And so they knew my dad was behind her not being there, or at least they suspected as much. And they were right, and they found out that they were right. And from what this man told me is that they ganged up on my dad. And my dad was a tough guy. My dad didn't lose too many fights. But there was no way he was going to beat all those guys coming at him at once. And I guess they ganged up on him, and they put a pretty severe beating on him anyway. Because he had screwed up their plans to do what they wanted to do with this young girl, this real pretty girl that they all had their eyes on. They all had a crush on. Anyway, that's the story. This man told me that story about my dad. I think he felt kind of bad because he made me feel bad, but, I mean, like I say, I have no doubt that my dad did bully him. That wouldn't surprise me at all, So I can understand. And I mean, Anyway, it was quite a thing to hear. And like I say, my dad never said a word about it. The only reason that I know anything is because that man told me, and that was after my dad had passed away. But that's the story anyway there. Some good thing that my dad did when he was a young man. I guess they never tried what they were planning. I guess the moment had passed or whatever, and they never formulated any more plans to do that, as far as I know, at least. There was no more to the story. The story ended with my dad getting 7 bells knocked out of him by this gang of guys that were mad at him for screwing them up, for preventing them from doing what they wanted to do. But that's the story anyway. I told you I'd tell it, and I've told it, and that's it. All right. We'll talk later.